15 years ago, Australia's greatest river system stopped flowing. Farmland turned to dust, and nearly 90% of its freshwater turtles vanished, pushed to the edge by predators and an unthinkable drought. Scientists responded with a desperate experiment, raising and releasing 1 million baby turtles into waterless rivers that seemed beyond hope. Now, evidence reveals the true, startling aftermath and the stakes for an entire continent if the rivers fail again. Where did all those turtles go? Stretching across more than 1 million square kilometers, the Murray-Darling Basin is the beating heart of Australia's inland. Its rivers and wetlands feed nearly 1 in 3 Australians, winding through farms, towns, and ancient floodplains. For generations, families have relied on these waters to raise cattle, grow wheat, and support entire communities. The basin's 77,000 kilometers of rivers and creeks supply about 40% of the nation's food, linking distant cities with the fortunes of rural towns. Standing at the edge of a dry bybong, a farmer recalls the days when the river would rise and fall with the seasons, bringing life to the land and certainty to those who worked it. "We used to count on the floods," he says, "knew when to plant, when to harvest." The river was our calendar, but the basin is more than a source of crops or drinking water. For Indigenous people, these rivers are living ancestors woven into stories and ceremony for tens of thousands of years. Rangers describe the sound of turtles slipping into the water, pelicans circling overhead, and the quiet resilience of red gum forests, each a sign that the river is still breathing. When the waters recede, everything changes. Livestock wander through cracked mud where reeds once grew. Local shops close as families move away, chasing rain that never comes. In some towns, water trucks become more common than school buses. The sense of loss is personal, immediate. A river that once united communities now divides them, its absence felt in every empty paddock and silent main street. The fate of the basin is the fate of the nation. If these rivers fail, it's not just wildlife at risk, but the lives and livelihoods of millions. The scale is almost impossible to grasp. An entire continent holding its breath, waiting for the water to return. In the summer of 2007, the rivers of the Murray-Darling Basin began to disappear. Whole stretches that once shimmered with water turned to cracked, sun-bleached clay. By 2009, satellite images revealed scars where wetlands had been. Ancient red gum forests, whose roots once drank deeply from the floodplain, stood dead and gray, their branches stripped bare by years without flow. Where fish once darted beneath lies, the only movement came from clouds of flies circling rotting carcasses in shrinking pools. A ranger walks the riverbank, boots sinking into powdery dust where water used to lap. He remembers the first time he saw an entire lagoon vanish. He says quietly that it was like losing a friend. You would come back each week, and the water would be lower. The birds gone. The turtles stranded in the mud. Across the basin, towns faced a new kind of drought. Farmers lined up for water deliveries as dams ran dry. In Menendez, the Darling River's flow stopped for months, an event without precedent in living memory. Livestock wandered through empty channels, searching for patches of green. In some places, the only water left was too salty or foul to drink. Children learned to brush their teeth using bottled water. Shops closed their doors as families left, forced out by a river that could no longer support them. The ecological toll was staggering. Mass fish kills left the banks littered with silver scales and bones. Frogs fell silent on the sandbanks. Fox tracks crisscrossed between the scattered remains of turtle nests. Without flowing water, even the most resilient species struggled to survive. The river was no longer a source of life, but a reminder of everything that could be lost when the rains failed. For those who stayed, the silence was the hardest part. No splash of turtles, no chorus of birds at dawn, just the wind and the memory of water. Decades ago, the rivers of the Murray-Darling Basin teemed with turtles. Children would spot their dome shells in every creek in Bebong. Today, those same stretches are eerily quiet. Recent surveys paint a stark picture. Across much of southeastern Australia, up to 91% of freshwater turtles have vanished in just 40 years. In some reaches, the numbers are even more dire. Scientists searching for the broad-shelled turtle along the lower Murray found barely a trace. Fewer than 200 adults left in entire river systems where there were once millions. The culprits are relentless. European reed foxes, introduced more than a century ago, patrol the sandy banks each nesting season. They dig up nearly every clutch of eggs, destroying up to 95% before a single hatchling ever sees water. Even those that make it out face shrinking wetlands and evaporating pools, stranded by droughts that last longer each decade. Without flowing water, young turtles are left exposed in muddy traps. Easy prey for predators are doomed by the heat. Dr. Ricky Spencer, a biologist who has spent years tracking turtles through the basin, describes the situation as a silent extinction. It is not just one bad year or a single drought. Every year, foxes take almost all the nests. Every year, fewer babies survive. We are watching entire populations collapse in slow motion. This loss is not limited to a single species. The Murray River turtle, the eastern long-necked turtle, and the broad-shelled turtle all have suffered massive declines. Once their presence kept rivers clean, cycling nutrients and scavenging dead fish. Now, with so few left, the ecological balance has tipped. For the scientists on the ground, the question is no longer if turtles will disappear from some rivers, but when. The emergency is real, and the clock is running out. In 2019, a new idea began to circulate among scientists, rangers, and local communities along the Murray-Darling. The numbers were bleak. Turtle populations collapsing, rivers turning to dust, and old ways of life slipping out of reach. But instead of accepting the loss, a group of biologists and indigenous rangers asked a different question. What if the answer was scale? Not a 100 turtles or 1,000, but 1 million. Could a project that bold even work? Associate Professor Ricky Spencer, who had spent years tracking turtles through drying wetlands, was among the first to push for something bigger. He knew that protecting a handful of nests or releasing a few hatchlings would never outpace the losses. The plan that took shape was simple in theory and daunting in practice. Collect eggs from vulnerable riverbanks, raise the hatchlings in safety until they were big enough to survive, and then return them to the wild by the thousands. The goal was to tip the balance, give the river a fighting chance by flooding it with new life. This was not just a job for scientists. Indigenous rangers, whose families had watched over these rivers for generations, joined the effort. Their knowledge of nesting sites and seasonal changes shaped every step. Community volunteers, school children, and farmers signed up to help, turning the project into a national movement. Training sessions taught people how to spot nests, protect eggs from foxes, and log turtle sightings using a simple phone app. Neighborhoods that had once watched the river fade now found themselves on the front lines of a rescue mission. The logistics were staggering. Eggs had to be collected before foxes found them, then carefully transported to temperature-controlled facilities. Each hatchling spent 9 to 12 months growing in tanks and ponds, fed and monitored by teams of carers. For many, it was their first close look at a creature they had only heard about in stories. By the end of that first year, hundreds of nests had been saved, and thousands of young turtles were growing stronger every day. The ambition was clear: reach 1 million and maybe, just maybe, restore the river's future. Egg collection begins at dawn, when the riverbanks are cool and quiet. Teams of scientists and local volunteers scan the sand for the telltale tracks of nesting turtles. Each nest is carefully uncovered, the eggs counted and marked to keep their orientation, then lifted into padded crates. Timing is everything. Move the eggs too late, and foxes will have already found them. On average, the program rescues eggs from more than 900 nests each year, with each clutch holding a dozen to 20 fragile lives. Inside the laboratory, the eggs settle into rows of temperature-controlled incubators. Staff monitor humidity and temperature around the clock, knowing that even a slight change can affect whether the hatchlings will be male or female. For the next 2 to 3 months, the eggs are weighed and checked for signs of mold or dehydration. The goal is simple: give each embryo the best possible chance to hatch, free from predators in the extremes of the riverbank. When the first tiny turtles break through their shells, they are moved to clean, filtered tanks. Here, the work of growing them to a safe size begins. Hatchlings feed on a diet of insects, small fish, and aquatic plants, mimicking the variety they would find in the wild. Water quality is tested daily. Technicians track growth rates, adjusting food and temperature to encourage steady development without deformities. Disease is a constant threat. Any sign of illness triggers immediate quarantine and veterinary care. After 9 to 12 months, the young turtles weigh between 400 and 600 gri, too large for most foxes to swallow. Some are tagged for future monitoring. Others are grouped by species and age, ready for release. The process is labor-intensive, often running on the energy of students, rangers, and retirees working side by side. Each turtle that leaves the facility represents months of vigilance and care, and a new chance for the rivers to recover. Buckets of young turtles, each one nearly the size of a human hand, lined the banks of the Murray on a cool morning in 2021. Rangers and community volunteers moved quickly, working in teams to carry the hatchlings from holding tanks to the water's edge. Some children, faces lit with nervous excitement, knelt beside the buckets and watched as the first turtles slipped into the shallows. In that single week, nearly 10,000 juveniles raised for months in protected tanks, fed and checked daily, entered the wild across dozens of restored wetlands. The scale was unlike anything seen before in these rivers. The release was timed with the return of environmental water. Pumps had been running for days, refilling bybongs and backwaters that had stood empty for years. As the turtles hit the water, they vanished almost instantly beneath the surface, scattering into reeds and submerged logs. For rangers, it was a rare moment of hope after years of loss. One field ecologist standing ankle-deep in the muddy bank explained that these head-started turtles were now large, enough to escape the jaws of foxes, the main threat that had wiped out so many nests in the past. Early signs of change arrived faster than anyone expected. In one restored reach, researchers had been monitoring the fate of dead carp left behind after a fish kill. In previous years, the carcasses would rot for weeks, turning the water foul and choking out oxygen. But with turtles back in numbers, the story was different. Within 2 days, most of the carp had been stripped clean, shells and heads poking out from the mud, the rest gone. Water tests showed a jump in oxygen levels, and the stench that once hung over the riverbank faded. It wasn't just the turtles. Native fish schools began to reappear, and birds returned to hunt along the edges. For the people who had spent years watching the rivers decline, these early results felt like a turning point. The project was no longer just an idea or a hope. It was alive, moving through the water with every turtle that disappeared into the reeds, each one carrying the promise of a cleaner, living river. High above the Murray Darling, satellite images from 2019 showed a landscape scarred by drought. Long brown stretches where rivers once curled through the floodplain. Just a few years later, those same images reveal a dramatic transformation. Ribbons of green threading across the basin, wetlands bursting back to life. A remote sensing analyst scanning the data points to the numbers behind the change. In one reach, plant cover jumped from barely 3% during the worst of the drought to over 60% as water and life returned. These are not isolated patches. Across the basin, the data tell the same story. Vegetation surging back in places where the rivers had been written off as lost. On the ground, the difference is unmistakable. Where dust and dead trees once dominated, thick mats of submerged plants now anchor the riverbed. This recovery is not just about water. With foxes unable to prey on the larger head-started turtles, survival rates for released juveniles have soared. Early tracking shows that most of these young turtles now survive their first vulnerable years, an astonishing recovery from the near-total losses of the past. The rivers are not just greener. They are alive in a way that has not been seen for decades. For the scientists and communities who watch the basin fade to brown, the data offer more than hope. They are proof that whole ecosystems can rebound given the right chance. A quiet sense of triumph runs through the basin as the project's milestone comes into focus. More than 1 million turtles protected, raised, and released now swim in rivers that only a decade ago seemed beyond saving. For the project coordinator, the number is less a promise than a finish line. Every nest saved, every hatchling grown, is a step toward a future where the rivers can sustain themselves. On the banks of the Murray, a Yorta Yorta elder stands beside the water, holding a young turtle in his hands. He recalls the old stories, the ceremonies that once welcomed turtles back each year. For the first time in half a century, those ceremonies are being revived. Children gather by the water's edge, learning the songs and responsibilities their grandparents feared would be lost. The river's recovery is not just ecological, it is cultural, a reconnection to country and tradition. Yet, the work is unfinished. Foxes still prowl the nesting banks, and European carp continue to dominate the water. Climate change brings longer, harsher droughts. The program faces a funding gap that could halt progress just as momentum builds. Internationally, scientists from Florida to India are watching, eager to adapt lessons from Australia's Head Start model. The basin story now serves as a test for river restoration worldwide, a reminder that hope alone is not enough. Without continued commitment, the hard-won gains could slip away, leaving the rivers and their people once again at risk. Australia's freshwater turtles now shape a living blueprint for global river recovery, a reminder that environmental collapse isn't fate, but a choice. As climate extremes intensify, the future of entire ecosystems hangs on decisions made today. The real test is whether this momentum outlasts the headlines. Restoration is possible, but only if we choose it again and again.